Well, welcome to the Iowa Caucuses MOOC. We're in the Parks Library, and behind us is one of the very famous Grant Wood murals that we have here on campus, and we're very grateful to the library and to Iowa State for allowing us to shoot in this wonderful historic place. Today in the MOOC, we're talking about digging into the Caucuses. And our guest is A.J. Spiker. A.J., thank you so much for joining us today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa from 2012 to 2014. And before that, during the last presidential cycle, I was on the Republican Party of Iowa's State Central Committee and also was state co-chairman for Congressman Ron Paul's campaign in Iowa. And I also served as a county party chairman prior to that here in Story County, where Ames is located. And my family is from Iowa. My wife's family is from Iowa. She comes from a farm family. And we chose Ames as where we wanted to make home. Mm-hmm. So we're thrilled to be here.
How long have you been interested in politics?
Well, I've been interested in politics since I was young. Mm-hmm. Everything.
You're still young, by the way.
Right. I would say going back to high school, but really? I wasn't super involved. I did do some door knocking in '96 when I was under 18. Mm-hmm. But really becoming involved began around the year 2000. I was very busy with the real estate career, and most of what I did was, donating pizzas and things to volunteers that were doing some door knocking and phone banking, helped with local politics. But as far as federal elections, I really got involved out of seeing the Republican Party go from being opposed to opposed to the Department of Education to doubling it under Bush. Seeing the prescription drug program expanded under Medicare, which we Republicans opposed Medicare originally. So I saw the party really growing these programs that we said we were fundamentally opposed to. And that's what really got me to be involved in 2007 in wanting to return the Republican Party to its roots.
Probably we should talk about the fact that you're kind of on the libertarian side of the Republican Party, right? I mean, it is a party that has sort of different trends in it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I supported Ron Paul, but first and foremost, I'd consider myself a Christian. Yeah. And limited government lines up very nicely with Christianity. If you look at the role of church and family, and the more you have as far as the family, the strength of the family, the smaller the government. Mm-hmm. So you want more power being with the people and with the family, less power being with government. And that lines up well, I believe, with my faith. Mm-hmm. And that's probably a greater reason why I chose Ron Paul and limited government than straight libertarianism.
Yeah, that's interesting. And Iowa is a place where the faith-based Republicans are very active and are really important during the Iowa caucuses as well.
They are. They're absolutely one of the largest voting blocs within, the Republican Party nationally, but within Iowa, as you go from having 600,000 registered Republicans down to about 120,000 that caucus on caucus night, those people who are the most committed tend to show up, and committed Christians tend to be a good percentage of that turn out on caucus night.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see what has happened in the past where someone like Governor Huckabee did very well, partly because he took a faith-based position, and of course in 2016 the field is really getting big, or is big already. And there are all kinds of candidates, ranging all across the Republican spectrum. So when you were chair of the Republican Party, what kinds of challenges here in Iowa did you face? What kinds of things were you interested in doing for the party?
Well, the big challenge as a party, especially in a caucus state, is the organization aspect. Mm-hmm. How you pull together 99 county parties and all of the precinct level activity to make caucuses happen. And we do caucus in an off year, and I chaired the party in the off year. So we did have to do the identical work as what you see in a presidential cycle, only it didn't have the straw poll. So the presidential preference poll didn't happen.
What happens in those off years? Because I think the people in this course probably don't understand that the caucuses happen constantly, but we only pay attention, once every 4 years or so.
Well, caucuses and conventions are probably the root of political activity within both parties. If you go back historically, local politics, and then moving up through convention levels, all the way to where it used to be conventions nominated the nominee for governor, for your party, Senate, Congress. There were several nominees selected at convention. Over the years, and around 1900, that really shifted, and we went to more of a primary system. But we still have intact what occurred then, and that is you elect your precinct leadership, so your local community leadership for your party.
And that's about 1,700
it's
different
just
precincts.
over 1,700 precincts in Iowa. And in Iowa, within the Republican Party, there are, and Democrat too, there are two ways you can elect your leadership, or two formulas. It's either 2 people per precinct, or it's a formula based on the vote at the top of the ticket. So you can have more committee people if you allocate it based on how the top of ticket performance was.
What else do you do in those off years then? Because those off years sort of are preparing the party, and the big event is every 4 years, the presidential ones, where the media comes and so on. What do you do in the off years?
The platform is what brings many activists out. Whether it's ethanol industry wanting to make sure that ethanol is part of the Republican Party platform or Democrat platform, or pro-life. You see a large number of pro-life people, traditional marriage that want to make sure the traditional marriage plank's intact. You're also seeing more limited government people getting involved who want to insert language into the party platform to have limited government, more individual liberty be a piece of the platform. So that's another element of the precinct caucus, and then also to elect delegates to the county convention, where you come up with, for your county, what platform or what things your county stands for, and then you elect delegates on to district and state convention from the county. So it's sort of a pyramid, and you start with 1,700, and then you go to 99 counties, and then you go to, well, now it's 4 districts. 4 districts.
And then finally 1 state convention.
Right.
And all of that kind of bubbles up to the top, and then you get the state party position on issues in the platform and so on.
You do. And I don't think until someone has put it all together, they really respect the amount of work that goes into it, both down at the precinct level and at the state convention level. I've chaired my precinct caucus. I remember in 2008 chairing my precinct caucus and having a classroom in Ames set up for everybody, and they were expecting turnout of maybe 60 or 70 people in my precinct, and I think we went well over 100. So these poor people were packed into this classroom, sweating, and we were scrambling around trying to find more voter registration forms because between John McCain and Ron Paul that year, you had new people wanting to come and participate in the Iowa caucuses.
Well, that's another thing I think that we need to really point out in this MOOC, and that is that Iowa has same-day registration.
They do.
Right?
And
tell me a little bit about that.
Well, the same-day registration law isn't as important as the party permits all members to participate in its caucus. So the day you register, you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. And if you register at the door to be a Republican or a Democrat on caucus night, you're permitted to participate in your precinct caucus. And it's a great way to bring new people into the party. And that was part of the reason originally that Iowa became a caucus state was having these precinct caucuses, you bring new life into the party.
Yeah.
And even with the Democratic Party, I think if you look at Warren and Bernie Sanders, you know, they're a different type of Democrat
Yes.
than Hillary if she runs.
That's right.
And they're going to bring different people to the precinct caucuses.
Yeah. I'm going to take a sip of my coffee, and I'm going to point out to our students that work never ceases for the Iowa Caucuses MOOC, and it's very early in the morning, and we needed to have our coffee before
I'll
we had
toast
this
to that.
conversation. So one of the things, you mentioned it already, but let me follow up on it, is there are a lot of Democrats and there are a lot of Republicans. The numbers that actually end up going to the caucuses is small compared to the total number. Do you have any ideas on how to drive up those numbers so that we get more people to participate? Because that's a criticism of the caucuses, is fewer people participate than in primary states.
Well, the way to have more people participate is having more candidates that appeal to the people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the more broad cross-section of candidates you get, the more participation you're going to get.
You mentioned 2008.
Yeah, 2008
Yeah.
was really, I believe, the big year, especially within the Democratic Party. You know, you had Hillary
Right.
Clinton, John Edwards, and Barack Obama.
Right.
And people forget, but Barack Obama wasn't expected to be the next president of the United States. No. And the two front runners in the Democratic Party were Hillary Clinton and John Edwards.
That's right.
And Barack Obama came out of nowhere and won Iowa.
Yeah.
And Iowa has received a lot of criticism because we don't have enough minorities that are part of the population.
Yeah.
Yet we launched the first African American president of the United States.
Which is pretty good proof that you know, anybody who comes to Iowa and manages to sell their political message is probably going to do okay.
Yeah, Iowans are extremely open-minded, and if candidates spend time here, talk to the voters, they can do very well here.
What are you going to do in the 2016 caucuses and campaign yourself?
Myself.
Yeah.
Well,
have you made plans yet or not?
I have. I expect I'll be involved with Senator Paul. Should he?
This is Rand Paul and
This
not
is
the
Rand
father,
Paul,
right?
yeah, of Kentucky.
Yeah.
In fact, he's talking about announcing potentially for president in 3 days, or 4 days from today.
From today, yeah.
So, you know, once he announces his intentions, I'll make a decision, obviously. But currently, I work for his PAC, and I'm an advisor to his political action committee.
Yeah. So when a candidate announces, what happens the next day? What, you know, sort of talk a little bit about what a candidate has to do to then go from announcing to moving forward towards the caucuses.
Well, Senator Paul will be doing what most traditional candidates do, which is an announcement in their home state, and really a tour after that of early states and some donor events. That is the customary early first step, and then after that, there's a lot of activity between states, fundraising, state party events, meeting with specific constituency groups within the Republican Party, and talking about what your message is to a lot of voters, not just in Iowa, but New Hampshire, South Carolina, and across the country.
And what does the campaign sort of organization look like? In other words, what kind, I'm interested because we have some students who keep asking me, if I'm a political science major, what are some of the things that I could do? I'm not going to run for office, but you know, there are other things that happen in the political process, especially around campaigns. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, you have your campaign infrastructure, which is more, you know, field staff is really the most grassroots level, and then working its way up through, you know, state leadership within each state. Sometimes consultants are hired to manage a state campaign effort. At the national level, typically you've got people involved in the press relations, media relations. You have pollsters who are brought onto a team, and you have senior campaign staff, you have debate team people, you have fundraising, which is extremely important
Sure.
to every campaign. And then you have what I refer to as the political industrial complex. You have your mail houses, your industries that are connected to campaigns, even though they are not the campaign itself.
Such as
a media company,
companies, yeah.
or and some of the polling companies are that way. It's not an individual who goes to work for a campaign, it's a polling firm.
Sure. I wanted you to talk about that because we know that American elections, and especially presidential elections, get more expensive all the time. Maybe this is one reason, is that it requires a really large and very complex organization with talented people. And to do that, you have to pay them and you have to have resources in order to get the organization going.
You do, and you really have to figure out the formula of how you get to the number of delegates needed to become the nominee.
Yeah.
And that everybody has their own path and how they plan to get there.
Yeah.
But you have to come up with the path for you. You have to get on the ballot in all of the primary states, figure out if state parties have any rules to be involved in their caucuses. Some of them have a filing, some have a filing fee. Some have signature requirements, same with states, if you file for the primary. So getting on the ballot is a big deal. And in 2012, 2 Republican candidates made the ballot in all of the states and territories. And it was Mitt Romney and Congressman Paul. So as far as organization goes, you have to be able to do these big things. Otherwise, you can't get to the math to become the nominee. And,
interesting.
And that's something that is really overlooked. Most of the, the consultant class focuses on, oh, we need to win Iowa, or oh, we need to win New Hampshire. But ultimately, it comes down to delegates. And delegates are, individuals. They all have their own beliefs, desires, hopes, and somehow you need to get supporters at the national convention.
Yeah.
And under the current rules, delegates are bound to the national convention, and there will be allocation that occurs. Each state has to file by fall their plan for how they're going to elect and allocate delegates. So that's something you'll see a lot of state parties working on between
Talk about
now and
Iowa a
fall.
little bit. Do you know how that's
Iowa.
coming along?
Iowa's having a big change right now because historically Iowa was a non-bound state.
Yes.
Caucuses in general were typically unbound delegates.
That meant delegates could go and make their own decision who to support.
And that was the history of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. If you go to the early days, all delegates were people elected through representative government up until the National Convention. And then the National Convention chose someone like Abraham Lincoln to be the nominee of the party. He didn't win primaries
or caucuses,
in Illinois or Iowa.
Yes. And that's why at the national conventions in those days, you saw a lot of trading going on.
A lot
the
of
candidates had to
campaigning.
go there and try to put together the delegates.
They
and
did.
Sometimes it took many, many votes before they got enough delegates.
And you talk about getting money out of the politics. If you really wanted to get money out of politics, that's what you would return to. It's a way you could get literally over $100 million out of the primary process. But the criticism would be, oh, it's a smoke-filled room, it's the elites that are going. So there are criticisms to it, but it is a system that gave us Abraham Lincoln. So it can't be completely criticized.
It can have some good results.
Right.
And you think that now in Iowa, let's say the precincts happen and the county happens and the district happens and then it goes to the state, then how are the delegates actually going to be designated?
Well, the party will come up with a formula, and
they haven't done that yet.
They haven't done that yet. The formula can have there's a threshold at which they have to bind. So if a candidate gets over 25% of the popular vote, so to speak, on caucus night, there has to be an allocation formula for that person under RNC rule. If it's under that, it's at the discretion of the state party. But I believe you'll see the party come up with a formula that allocates delegates at a much lower number than 25. 25 was really put in, 25%, as a number to make sure that states aren't putting in place an onerous number so they don't have to bind delegates. But Iowa has not done this before, and my understanding is they're working through that process now. You have three elements to each state's delegates. You have your automatic delegates within the GOP, which are your Republican National Committee man, Republican National Committee woman, and the state chairman. All three are members of the national party.
So they automatically go to the convention,
yes. And then the other two elements, one is district delegates, congressional district delegates, and each congressional district receives 3 delegates and 3 alternate delegates. There are no alternate delegates for the national committee people.
I see.
So, and then for the additional delegates, those are all elected at large. And every state has a different process for how they elect those. But at Iowa, historically, those are elected in the state convention.
Tell me about, does the governor automatically become a delegate?
No, that's a great question. And I talked to
because that used to be the case.
Right.
Yeah.
I had a talk with a federal official in 2011 who was under the impression he was just an automatic delegate. He didn't need to do anything. And I said, well, no, you need to work to become a delegate because there are no automatic delegates. In fact, the rules of our party prohibit naming a governor or a senator as an automatic delegate. There can be no such rule to give them special treatment.
That's pretty interesting because that, of course, again, is different from the way it used to be. Because it used to be the big party leaders, bosses, and so on, they automatically were delegates to the conventions of their parties.
Right.
And played a big role.
Yeah, there's a strong tradition that, I mean, if you're the governor of the state of Iowa or Illinois or Indiana and you want to go to a national convention, you should be able to get elected. And I think most people agree with that. And
where would you get elected?
You could either do it at your district convention to become a delegate from the district.
From the district,
or at the state convention to be on the at-large delegation. But either of those would be a possibility, and most governors or United States senators who want to go end up going.
They end up going, because you see them at the convention and they're usually playing some sort of big role.
And oftentimes governors such as John Sununu, Sununu chaired the RNC Convention Rules Committee at the National Convention in Tampa. So governors and prominent senators are oftentimes tapped to help with the National Convention. And of course in Iowa, Lieutenant Governor Kim Reynolds was an alternate delegate to the National Convention. I believe she was Terry Branstad's alternate.
I see.
But she was selected to be the secretary of the National Convention.
One of the things that's come up is improving the Iowa caucuses. Do you have any ideas on, there have been a few criticisms of them lately, missing ballots, and so, who actually won the caucuses on caucus night. Do you have any ideas on how the caucuses could be improved for 2016?
Yeah, well, in my opinion, you cannot have a 14-day uncertainty period.
From caucus night until you declare the winner.
To declaring a winner, or till you certify a vote. And what happened in 2012 in Iowa was, it was such a close race, one of the closest races in United States history. Matt Strawn, who was chairman of the Republican Party of Iowa, declared Mitt Romney the winner of the caucuses on caucus night. 14 days later, Santorum actually won the certified vote, but Matt didn't declare him winner. And then the party's Central Committee intervened, declared Santorum the winner of Iowa. And having that 14-day uncertainty period, wasn't helpful to Iowa and ultimately wasn't helpful to the caucuses or to Mitt Romney or Rick Santorum.
Yeah.
So
how do we improve that?
In my opinion, the best way to improve it is to work to go to same night certification, which is a challenge, but in the age of technology, you should be able to write down the results on a piece of paper, take a picture of that paper with your smartphone, and somehow send it off to where it can be verified somewhere.
So that would be the party headquarters, or
the party
or
headquarters,
like that,
or you know, in 2012 there were threats by Anonymous, the hacker group, and so the party was very concerned about having internet shut down, technology shut down. But I believe you can work with some you know, highly technical people to make sure this is done on caucus night.
Sure, the Iowa State University Information Insurance Program, which is, or Assurance Program, which is the #3 in the country and is one of the best security master's programs. They probably would be happy to work with the two parties.
I'm sure the parties would benefit from it.
Yeah. The other thing you can do is have redundancy, so that if the system crashes, you then have a manual backup.
Right.
You know, we still have telephones probably after something gets hacked, and so
you do.
just, you know.
And in Minnesota, for example, they have a caucus, and their results that are called in that night are the results.
Yeah.
So
and there's no recounting.
No.
Yeah.
No. So the best way, or the most secure way to know that the caucus results are all accurate is, and this is where I think many people in the national press don't understand our system, but in the Iowa caucuses, if you go to a caucus site, typically the votes are literally counted on top of the table. And you can see on a piece of paper, oh, it said Huckabee, so it goes to that pile, and then that pile.
I see.
And there's a group of people that watches the counting happen right on the table. And so it's very transparent. And if everything is done that night within that room, you have very good results. But there are some concerns too of, if you're doing certification and if there are forms, who's taking the form with them, and is something changing from that room to when it's mailed in? So it's important also that you get it done in front of that group.
In front of the whole group at each caucus. Yeah, that's interesting. Transparency is important.
It is.
If you were to give the students in the Iowa presidential caucuses MOOC class some advice, why should they go to a caucus in 2016?
Well, if you're from Iowa, this is a wonderful opportunity to get to know your friends and neighbors. These are the people that live in your community and are part of it. And you have an opportunity to interact with people and get to know them, talk about politics, moving on, who you support for president, why you support them, what got you involved. If you're from out of state, if you're the press, you know, if I was press, I would want to cover, you know, maybe this year I'd cover a big or a small one, caucus site, and then the next cycle I'd flip it, you know, because there is a big difference between going to a caucus in someone's living room, which does happen in Iowa, in some of the rural townships, and going to, you know, maybe at Blackhawk County, the last two cycles, they held their caucus in the Unidome.
Because
you know,
they brought them all together.
They brought them all together from the county, and then they broke into their precincts within the dome.
Within a huge stadium,
And then the speakers spoke on the AstroTurf within the dome. So
I like the living room better. And I live in Milford Township by Nevada, and so our caucuses for both parties have always been in people's living rooms with hot chocolate and some apple pie, and the blizzard blowing outside the window, you know, in January or February. So, so you're telling them, get involved in the caucuses.
Yeah, get involved, and you can make a huge difference. If you look at how close the Iowa caucuses were in 2012, one of the closest elections ever, and I think 2016 could be equally as close. You're going to have a huge field potentially running, and the party's nomination's wide open.
Right.
So
both parties.
Both parties. And you can have a far greater impact in an early state like Iowa than you could in many other states.
That's right. Yeah. Well, I want to thank A.J. Spiker for joining us this morning. And we will see you on the internet in the Iowa Presidential Caucuses MOOC.